So again, because we're using our slightly augmented new format, we're going to start off by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. This would be episode 6. We're going to start off with our general impressions of the episode before kind of getting into some spoilerific discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have a fancy Picard graphic. I ran out of time. Oh, we'll use that one. But we're going to start by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of this episode of Picard?
General impressions. I will say that I felt more positive about this episode than the last episode. That's not exactly a high bar to set, unfortunately, because the last episode was, I think, very controversial and had some pretty low points in Trek, honestly. But I do think that this episode was better, and I do think it actually holds up better than a lot of the other episodes in the series in general. I wouldn't necessarily put it up there exactly with episode 1, which I think we both agreed on is probably the best episode of the series so far. But it's kind of close for the most part. I thought after the first act or so, I thought that it moved decently. There was some issues I had with the first act that I thought were just unnecessary and kind of made it drag. That's kind of some of the unevenness of the show overall, I think, is that there are parts of this episode, and there's part of this series in general, where you feel like things are being rushed, and then the next minute you feel like things are going on way too long. Like why are they taking so long to explain this very simple thing that's going on in the show? But why are they using quasi pseudo techno speak when it's not necessary? Why are they inventing new terms when it's not necessary? That was a big a problem with episode 5, in my opinion, when they were trying to explain the heist, if you will, the con that they were doing. It was very straightforward, and they just took forever to explain it, and I was completely confused over a very straightforward plan. So there was some of that in this episode as well. But like I said, I thought once you got over the first act or so, it seemed like it picked up a lot, and there were parts that were going real fast and actually were holding my attention, and I was actually getting kind of excited about. So, and I can't say that about a lot of the rest of Picard, unfortunately. But I did have those moments in this one, particularly at the end. I thought that the ending was somewhat exciting and all that kind of stuff. Where I was kind of almost on the edge of my seat at the end of the episode. I still really dislike Raffi. I'm really going to get into it in our deep dive about my issue with her, and specifically in this episode that I think was a real low point, and I could have been handled completely differently. But Rios seems okay. I think he got through the episode okay. The scientist girl, I think she's ruined. She was ruined by the previous episode, and she's literally like damaged goods now. And so I was not impressed with her character. For the first time, I think, in this series, we had someone see Picard on screen for the first time, and they didn't treat him like he was a big jerk. We actually had a moment where someone was reintroduced to Picard and wasn't like, "You bastard, you did this and this," and this is the first time that's happened. We're on episode 6. We're over halfway in the series, and for the very first time, somebody actually treats Picard the way that the fans would treat Picard.
Right.
And that was a good moment. That's probably one of the reasons I actually like this episode. And so it was a good moment. Um, uh, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Hugh appears in this episode, and I think Hugh did a very good job. I think he's a high point. I think he is the only character so far, in my opinion, other than some moments with Picard himself, where I really felt that he was actually embodying the spirit of Trek,
Right.
where the character was actually doing very Trek-like things. I think this is the first time I've seen that. So overall, I would say that my impression is pretty good actually of this episode. I do have some major issues in the first act, and I am going to get into them in the deep dive. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I see that Orville Nation is in the chat, and wanted to say thank you, PJ, for stopping by. You're always welcome on the show, by the way, PJ. If you ever want to come on the show, just let us know, because we'd love to hear from you. In fact, we have some news to give about you later when we start talking a little bit more about news from the channel itself. But PJ, you're always welcome to join in, and I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard as well. But yeah, overall, I would say that it's kind of more of kind of a high point in the series. At least I feel like the story is finally really moving. It's taken us, like I said, we're over the halfway point of the first season, and finally, I feel like the story is really moving.
Wow, that light is really strong. Sorry, but I'm still messing with everything here, which I shouldn't be doing live on the show. So I wanted to mention too, I want to thank Orville Nation, PJ, for commenting. As always, well, at least for the time being right now, I want to mention that I want to thank everyone who comes into the comment and actually leaves a comment and kind of joins the discussion for the show. I like to encourage people to do that. So we had this. This is going to be the sketch card we give away during this episode. It's kind of unusual because it's Mighty Mouse. And there's the artist proof thing there on the back, and it'll make more sense as we dive further into the episode. But I wanted to mention that real quickly, that we are still doing that with this episode. My impressions of Picard. Let's see. I liked this episode. I actually, there was a lot about this episode I enjoyed, quite a bit. No, yeah, I mean, it was fun. There was a lot of aspects of this that were fun. I enjoyed this episode. I'd have to say this is one of the better episodes for me. I wouldn't say this is the highlight of the series. I think episode 1 is still the highlight, but I quite enjoyed this episode. There was a couple things I didn't care for, but as we get into the deep dive, we can get further into that. But overall, I'd have to say this was an enjoyable episode of Picard for me personally, and that's my general impressions of this episode. So,
yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I think, especially with how it ended. I have some things I can nitpick, and I will. But overall, I do think it was an enjoyable episode. But I did have some issues with it, especially as I said in the first act. So you want to get into some spoilers here?
Yes, let's get into some spoilers.
Let me get my little spoiler alert here.
And then I did pull up a Picard graphic if you want to share my screen. It's not as fancy as we like to make them, but we got a Picard graphic. And I think this graphic, I selected it because it kind of sums up how I feel about this is my favorite part of the episode. We'll just leave it at that for sure. Do you want to get into just kind of giving us a quick synopsis of the high points of what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this image happens very early. This is part of the teaser. So there's two parts to the teaser in this episode before we get to the credits. The first one is it appears to be a flashback of Soji as a child. And apparently she is dreaming. And the way that the dream goes is that she she basically, it's like a stormy night. She's kind of like waking up. She's going down a hallway, and she goes into her father's lab, and basically her father seems to like chastise her or something along those lines. And then after her being chastised, she just wakes up. So it appears to be like some sort of flashback, a recurring dream that she has. And the next thing we get is sort of it's basically Picard kind of establishing what they're going to do, what they need to do in order to get Soji, because they know now that Soji is on the artifact on this Borg cube. So he's kind of saying, he's laying things out that we need to go obviously to the artifact because we need to find Soji. You know, people are obviously concerned, and of course Picard starts to get concerned. We have sort of like a kind of a PTSD kind of moment where Picard is kind of reflecting on his assimilation by the Borg, and that's kind of where we get this scene. Is Picard is kind of doing research. He actually does like search terms on his computer essentially for Borg, the artifact, and Hugh, because Hugh is the director of the Borg reclamation program. What's interesting is what's established also in this scene, or as they're talking about things, is that the Borg reclamation program is sort of like a sub program within what the Romulans are doing, because technically the Romulans control the artifact. They're in possession of the cube. It's in their space. They're handling security. They're the ones that are basically harvesting the parts and selling them, presumably. But there is another independent program within this called the Borg Reclamation Program. And that's what Hugh is actually the director of. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. So they kind of established that this is sort of like almost like a Red Cross, you know what I mean? Like working within the Borg cube to rescue the Borg that they're harvesting the parts from. Because the Romulans don't care about them, but Hugh is basically in charge of helping these people and sort of reintegrating them. So that's when we get this shot. There's a shot, obviously, where Picard is actually looking at an image of himself as Locutus from The Best of Both Worlds, and it was pretty cool because they actually interlaced the image on top of Picard's face, which I thought was really, really cool. I really like that. Obviously, it kind of gives you, as a hardcore Trekkie, myself, it kind of gives you like, goosebumps and everything like that, looking at that image. And then also Picard's reaction to that image, because it's very, very traumatic to him. And so I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was done very well. You can see the kind of image right here where he kind of basically interlaced his face, and it did a really good job. It looked really good.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
They got it like perfect, where his face just interlaced right on that hollow screen. And I definitely think that was a really cool moment, a really cool moment in the episode. So that's how the teaser starts. Once we get past the teaser, this is where we start to get into territory that really was kind of the low point of the episode for me. I'm not pulling any punches anymore about how much I really dislike Raffi. I think that she's a terrible character. And what really kind of, I'll say it kind of infuriated me, because the actress went on the Ready Room with Will Wheaton and said one of the big things that she's trying to accomplish, one of the things that she's so excited about, is she wanted to present sort of she wanted to present an image that people that struggle with addiction are not useless, that they have a place, and that there are many people that struggle with addiction, and she kind of wants to be like a champion of their cause. I'm paraphrasing what she said, but it was something that she said that was very important to her. And the way they treat her relapse in this episode is like a joke. And I predicted that, by the way. I don't know if you remember, but I predicted that we would get Raffi having a relapse. That was very obvious. You know what I mean? I predicted that on the last show. And the way that they treat her relapse is basically that she's like literally like drunk and high, and they decide that she needs to help them because they have to get credentials to get onto the artifact. In order to get on the Borg cube, they need diplomatic credentials. Now, how or why the hell Raffi would be good at this, I don't know. We were told that she's in Starfleet intelligence. That doesn't have anything to do with diplomatic papers or anything like that. In fact, the person she calls is a Starfleet officer. So it's like, this doesn't even make any sense. Shouldn't she be calling somebody like in the diplomatic corps? You know what I mean? Like an ambassador that she knows, which we could have had something like that. So even the continuity is terrible. It doesn't make sense within the world. So she's calling a friend in Starfleet, a friend who is, you know, pretty much sick of her, just like everybody else is. And she goes through this whole little very convoluted spiel, and she's drunk and high. She's literally smoking and drinking as she's doing this. And she goes through this really silly spiel to kind of con the Starfleet officer into giving her diplomatic credentials for Picard. Okay. And I just thought the scene was so silly, so unrealistic, and it totally took me out of the world, especially when Patrick Stewart, and I'm saying Patrick Stewart, not Picard, gets up and claps for her. Because that was just like, that was such a bunch of actors on set moment. I mean, it really just took me out of the world for a second. It was just like, okay, that was terrible. That whole scene was silly. It was convoluted. You're totally minimizing the fact that this woman has now relapsed to care. You know, nobody cared. It was just like a big joke to them. And then they're applauding her for her little scam that she did to get the Starfleet officer to give them the credentials. I thought it was terrible. I really thought it was terrible. And I think if you wanted to treat this subject with any kind of seriousness, what should have happened was she should have gone in there stumbling, drunk, high, practically incoherent, and she should have just screwed everything up. Because that's what happens when you relapse, you know? That's what they should have shown. That's what they could have shown. It could have been a very deep moment to show what that kind of process is like, but instead they just made it a big joke. And she did fine. Even though she was drunk and high, she did fine. So that's the message of Trek. Hey, you can be high and you can be drunk. You can still do your job. No, it doesn't work like that, you know? So that really kind of infuriated me because I felt like they took me out of the moment. And I also felt like in terms of what the actress has said, what her sort of goal has been and what she's trying to kind of accomplish with the role, I was like, this isn't good for that. This is not a good message to be putting out for people that have either dealt with addiction directly or loved ones or anything like that. You're creating a very unrealistic expectation that you can still do your job and still come out smelling roses when you're drunk and high, you know? So I hated that. I absolutely hated that. And I thought they kind of just glossed over this entire process when they could have really made it something interesting for Raffi's character. You know, they could have even had something where you could have waited. You could have Raffi still just acting fine. She doesn't have to relapse right away. Because a lot of times when people relapse, it's not the big event that makes them relapse. It's like a culmination of events, you know? So it's kind of like something really silly and obscure sets you off, not the fact that this big thing happened with her son. There's just so much to me that they could have done in that scene that they didn't do, and it just really took me out of it, and I really hated it. I really hated it. I thought they made it into a joke. I really thought they made the whole process of addiction and relapse as a big joke. We do have a comment here from Clyde Neville, who is saying, "Good evening, Dave. Looking forward to more excitement." Because Eric goes into the depth of the show, has he considered writing his own show? And Clyde, yes, actually, I am involved in film production on an independent small level. And in fact, I actually have a proof of concept trailer that should be finishing up pretty soon. But hopefully I'll be able to share on the show and all that kind of stuff. I'm even working on a project right now with Dave that we're just we're very preliminary at this point. But hopefully we'll be announcing some news about that as well. So yes, Clyde, I am interested in film production. I have involved in film production. And actually, in terms of writing, I have been working with my director on a script. So yeah, I definitely am into that sort of stuff and working on it. So we'll see how that goes, right? And then people can criticize me and go into all sorts of depth and say, hey, what about this? What about that? Well, that was a big plot inconsistency.
Right.
And Katie's back in the chat. We're always happy to see you, Katie. She said that scene disgusted me. Someone like Janeway, whom I admire, would have taken that bottle, poured it out, and thrown the vape pen on the ground and smashed it. Picard shouldn't have clapped. Thank you, Katie. That's exactly where I'm coming from. Why is everybody allowing this woman in front of them to just make a complete ass of herself with the ball? I mean, it's one thing when you show up hungover, right, to work.
Right.
That's like one stage of it, right? There's one stage where you show up hungover to work. The other stage is you actually show up drunk to work. The last stage is you drink at work. You understand that? That's the way that this kind of stuff works. And you can also insert, a drug addiction the same way. One day you come in, you're kind of hungover. Next day you come in wasted. And then the next thing you know, you're actually like shooting up at work. You know what I mean? Shooting up or smoking at work. So I thought that was treated really, really badly. Really, really badly. And I can't say enough about how badly I think they treated that and how they did not treat that situation with the seriousness that it should have been treated, especially, again, with the actress saying, this is why I'm doing this. You know what I mean? This is why I'm so into the part. Is so I can be sort of an advocate. Yeah, you're not an advocate. I'm sorry. That was TV BS. And it was not the way that things really work when it comes to addiction and all that kind of stuff. And you sent a terrible message. You sent a terrible message that you can still do your job drunk and high. That's a terrible message to send people. It's a terrible message to send people. Oh, thank you. So Clyde said, great, looking forward to your stuff. I am too. I'm anxious to see how it turns out. So when you're involved in a producing role, you have to let a lot of other people do things, and you kind of just have to let them do it because, my role is mostly as a producer. So my role is mostly in putting the pieces together and then letting other people work, and trying to get funding and things like that. So I'm looking forward to it too, Clyde. I'm hoping that it goes well. That's kind of where I was there. And so did you have any feelings on that scene, Dave? I'm just curious. Did it upset you at all, like it upset me, or did you just kind of gloss over it?
It did bother me. It did bother me quite a bit. I don't understand why everyone was just kind of okay with it. I mean, I guess because it's not a Federation starship, they're kind of like, well, whatever. I don't know. I did think it was weird. I was going to try, in all honesty, I was going to try and focus on the more positive aspects of the show and the things that I really enjoyed, because I feel like that the show has a tendency to do some things that bother me, displayed with the last episode. The tendency is to do, I guess they're in such a hurry to do things that normally you would not be allowed to do on quote unquote Star Trek, that they're kind of in a hurry to just stick it all in our face. So I thought it was unfortunate that they felt like they had to do that. I did, but like I said, there was other things about the show that I did enjoy. So yeah, but this scene did bother me. And I was going to mention, Clyde Neville actually works with the Prescott Valley Performing Arts, and he actually does a lot of stuff actually with live stage theatrical productions. So
that's
Clyde
awesome.
is also a creative professional himself. We've got a lot of amazing creative professionals coming in into the chat. It's one of the fun things about the show. But no, yeah, the scene did quite bother me. But I was going to try and focus on more of the things I enjoyed.
Yeah, well,
so
one thing I can say is I'm probably going to end this review on a positive note. I can finally say that, which is not always easy to say in Picard, but
right.
But I did want to get that house cleaning out of the way again, especially because the actress has gone on record as saying this is important to her, and this is like why she thinks why she likes the role, and I'm just like, you're really missing it right now. Katie had another comment. She said, "I'm currently watching The Offspring on hashtag All Star Trek," that's how I've first kind of started interacting with Katie, was from the hashtag All Star Trek. And this Picard is not the same. As a fan, it makes me unhappy in many aspects. Also, regarding sweaters all the time. Cisco, you betrayed your uniform. So good stuff. And I will put out a little shout out again to hashtag All Star Trek. That's a community online of people that will watch basically 5 episodes of Star Trek straight from the original series to Enterprise. Sometimes you can come in at any point. It's from the Heroes and Icons, which is a digital sub channel that you can get through cable or through an antenna, depending on where you live. And a lot of people, what they even do is they'll just find out what the schedule is, and they'll just be watching like on Netflix or CBS All Access, and they just follow along with the chat. And it's a fun way to, especially if you've seen a lot of these episodes a lot of times, it's a fun way to interact and kind of see it in a new way, because you have all these other fans coming in with their little ideas and inputs, and oh, well, that scene was silly, or this is the history of that scene. It's a fun hashtag. And it's usually very positive too, I would say, which sometimes you don't have, unfortunately, right now in Star Trek fandom. Sometimes people can get downright mean and personal. And here on this show, we try to never make it personal. We're talking about the show. We're talking about the actors. We're talking about the quality, that kind of stuff. We're not trying to insult anybody or dismiss anybody else's view. If you really like the show, we encourage you to chime in, and we would love to respond and talk to you and all that kind of stuff. And it's not like we're totally one way or the other where we hate the show. I think actually when we end this, by the time we end this review, we're probably going to be in a fairly good place, I think. But I'll always encourage you guys to come on and chat. Speaking of which, actually we actually have 2 additional guests that are ready to come on the show.
Awesome. Very cool.
Looks like we've got Ed Harris, and we also got PJ from Orville Nation. Let me get the banner down so we can see everybody.
Hey guys.
Very cool. Hey
PJ.
It's got a nice wall. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Hey Ed, how's it going?
Not too bad.
Very cool.
I've got a face for radio, so you're going to see a nice little silhouette there of that.
Right. No, it's all good. It's all good. Very cool. Awesome. Well, this is really cool. I was just going to say real quick. I just want to say real quick again, thank you to everyone who is commenting and basically in the live chat. Again, this will be the card that we'll be doing. This is the sketch card. This is original art. This is not a print. This is an artist proof. This is from Cartoon Classics. This is original art by me. So we're going to be doing a drawing towards the end of the show, and someone will win this original art sketch card. A lot of packages went out into the mail already. Some people have already received them. Mike Lombard was our big winner on for signing up for the email newsletter, and that's in the mail to him. So enough about that. It's enough house cleaning. Let's get on with it. So awesome. So do you want to drive this crazy train here, Eric, or? Oh, we can't hear you. Can anyone hear me?
No, that was I muted my mic. Sorry about that. I was
okay.
letting you talk, so I didn't cause any interference. I got to get better at that. So PJ, I assumed you saw the episode. Do you have any like general impressions as we're getting in the deep dive? But do you have any general impressions?
I did. Let me just say, nice to meet Ed, and which I guess we just lost. And Dave, it's such a pleasure. I've been wanting to connect with Eric, but I've never been coincided with you. So it's a pleasure, Dave.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to talk to you. Of course, I've interacted on your live stream shows over on Orville Nation. I got smacked down because someone hated my Space 1999 resolution.
You're never going to live that down, are you,
idea.
man? You're just never going to live that down.
I am never letting that go. Anyone who knows me knows that I never let something go. So that's what I'm known for. That I don't know. It's not a good thing, but it's true. But no, I quite enjoyed when I get the chance to actually come on Orville Nation and chat with everyone during the live stream shows. It's a lot of fun.
And we do have Ed back. Ed, back. Did you get a chance to actually see the episode, Star Trek Picard, episode 6, The Impossible Box?
I did. It was one of the best episodes I've ever watched.
There you go. Okay, so
I did that purposely just to be contrary. It didn't work out for me.
You got to commit to it. If you're going to be contrary, you got to commit. You know,
I'm committed to contrarily being contrary. I think that I try to not look at any commercials or I just look at it holistically as I'm watching it. I understand like there are lots of flaws, and I find lots of issues with this season, just like how it's so disjointed, the scene jumping, like arbitrary plot lines that just seem to appear out of nowhere. And then there's some obvious stuff. It just seems it doesn't seem to flow very well. But
yeah, I'd say that's a standard problem in the show. We were talking earlier before you came on. One of the issues that I've had is it's very uneven. There are times when you feel like things are going too fast, and then there's other times where it's dragging. You know what I mean? Where it's like this. You don't need to go into that much depth and explanation into this because this is pretty straightforward. This is pretty straightforward stuff, And then there's other times we're just like, wait, what's going on? So I think that's one of the problems of the show is it does get uneven sometimes.
I completely agree. The profanity throws me off. That and Discovery.
Oh, totally. It takes me out of the world.
Yeah,
that's not Star Trek to me anymore. Now I feel like I'm just down the street at the supermarket or something.
Yeah, I mean, like it's something I want to be able to watch with my kids, and then all of a sudden it's like Phil, Floor, and Filth, to quote 70s Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
But
on Red Skirts, we like to use the term flarket, which I thought was hysterical because I just recently returned to Twitter, and apparently someone is using the term flarket for some kind of app service or something. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We made that up for Red Skirts. And someone is literally using flarket to name their app.
Like fire. It's a regular Katniss.
PJ,
Cool. So PJ,
PJ, you didn't really tell us, so what are your kind of initial impressions of the episode?
So I've been progressively being turned off by the show, my personal opinion. So this is the only episode I've only watched once, because I kind of wanted to disconnect. However, I will say this. I feel like we all know that episode 6 is kind of where Shaban was given the reins of the show.
Okay.
And I do feel there's something different about this episode a little bit. So I'm curious to see where 7, 8, 9, and 10 go. I thought it was okay. For me, it was, there were less things wrong with it than other episodes. It was all right. There was a few moments which I do feel were very Star Trek. I do feel like when Picard and Hugh when Hugh was showing Picard the Borgs that were being reclaimed, it felt Star Trek for a while there. So there were moments. No,
that was a real Trek moment. That was actually a real legit like Trek moment. That's very Trek. what Hugh is doing, his mission or whatever, that was very, very Trek.
So let me just say that what from the moment that Picard saw Hugh and they kind of connected, and Hugh smiled and was happy to see Picard, and Picard was happy to see him, and those Borg were trying to help Picard. They weren't trying to hurt him. And they all kind of share that scar, that they all share a commonality. And from that moment on, I loved this episode. All that stuff where you saw what Hugh was doing. Now, let me mention, okay, I sure as heck hope that we don't have to watch the super, whatever it is, Vash, whatever they're called, torture Hugh in the next episode.
I think that's almost a given. I think that's almost a given. This is a preview, so I think that's almost a given.
That's where they're going to lose me big time.
Did you guys see the episode 7 leak from Japan?
No. I have not. I haven't seen the leak. I just saw the teaser, and then I saw the scene from the Ready Room that Will Wheaton's show.
Is it true that Japan in Japan they showed episode 7 instead of episode 6? And some people have actually done a review on episode 7.
Really?
True? I think it.
I haven't heard that. That's the first time I've heard that. So I wasn't aware of that. Just wanted to get back to the chat real quick. Katie had another comment, and I think it was off of what Ed you were saying earlier. She says, "I can't stand the profanity. If this was the first Trek series I watched, I would not be a fan. I could never imagine Janeway cursing. Hard pill to swallow as a fan who tries to remain optimistic." And I can tell you, because I follow Katie on Twitter, and Katie is like the most optimistic person in the universe. She always tries to say good things and nice things, and really tries to be like kind of a champion for Star Trek. And I know her favorite is Voyager. That's her favorite series, and she loves Janeway. She loves Seven of Nine. But yeah, Katie, I agree with you. If this was the first Star Trek that I was watching, I would be completely turned off. I would just be like, this is just like everything else. I wouldn't necessarily see what was really distinctive about it. And she goes on to say, the Hugh hugging Picard was actually a moment started by Jonathan Del Arco, who is the actor who portrays Hugh. Says he wanted the greeting to be joyous and a hug. Leave it to the actors to know their characters. And this is true. I saw Jonathan Del Arco posted this. He said he came up with the idea for the hug. It was not in the script. And that should tell you something. She's absolutely correct, because he tweeted that. He said, it was my idea to do the hug. That was not on the script. And this is the first time we see anybody being nice to Picard, when they first meet him. Nobody has been nice to Picard. They always keep telling him that he's a jerk. He screwed everything up, even when he didn't really screw everything up. That they're mad at him for reasons that don't make any sense, just to be mad at him. But yeah, this was a good moment. And kudos to Jonathan Del Arco, the actor, for understanding this, for getting it, for being a fan, for actually being into this. Because I saw him talk at Star Trek Vegas last year, and he's into it. You know what I mean? And he gets it. And it's a good contribution, and good on him for doing that. For making that decision. Absolutely. That the writers didn't. The writers did not make that decision.
That was the moment where I smiled, and I was just thinking, "Oh, thank God."
Katie's seen it. She said she saw the leaked episode, but no spoilers. Man. She's not going to be talking about. She said she saw it.
Well, the one saving grace I have to say is because they're on a Borg cube. And Hugh is part of the Borg reclamation, whatever they're calling it, project.
Yes.
If the Romulans decide to try to do something to him, I think Hugh does have some people that could probably come, hopefully, to save him. I'm hoping that we're not going to see a repeat of what happened with the last episode. I can't.
The Borg would help him, right? The former Borg would all help him.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm thinking.
Hope.
I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. So,
but you know what? I would not put it past him to kill Hugh in the next episode. I would not put it past him that he will die a horrible death in the next episode. Because of what they did to each other.
All I could think of is with him interacting with everyone in the episode is how much I'd love for him to be a part of the crew moving forward. like, Hugh be a part of the crew, and like how awesome that would be. I mean, that would be really interesting, and it would be fun too because Picard would definitely have someone in his corner. I don't know. I don't know. This episode to me.
This is the good part. This is the good part because Hugh was like doing almost like the hero worship thing of Picard. He was treating him the way that fans treat Patrick Stewart. You know what I mean? Like he was like, hey man, only you would really get this. What we're doing here. You know what I mean? Because you're gonna get it. You're gonna understand this. What we're doing, trying to bring these former Borg, back. So it really was it's a high moment of the series, honestly, because we really haven't had anything like that in the series prior to this.
Yeah.
This is it, so, and it was a good moment. And I commend Jonathan D'Arco for what he did and his contribution to this, because, I like it. I like his take on the character and the way that the character's matured and what he's doing, because he would understand. And it makes sense because, he was one of the first Borg to get his humanity back. So it makes a lot of sense. Also, Bobby is saying hi. Bobby has been a pretty loyal viewer of the show. Bobby says, "Good evening, everyone. This episode was a step in the right direction," and I agree with you. And I think it's all because of Jonathan.
Yeah, I do too.
I think it's Hugh. Hugh, I like Hugh. He did a good job. And I like his contribution to Star Trek right now.
The actor is also in good favor with CBS execs, which is a good thing, and that's why I don't think they're going to kill him off.
What would be neat if you can reach out to him, PJ, because I know PJ does a lot of shout outs. He does interviews. He did an interview with the actor who played Icheb, with Manu. Be neat if you could ever get Jonathan to come on your show, or get him to do a shout out and see if he actually if he's interested in being on the Orville. Because I know you always ask a lot of Sci-Fi alum, and he gets them to answer. Like he got Gates McFadden to do a shout out, and she talked about, well, I haven't been approached, but I'm interested. Because he always asks, like, hey, would you be on the Orville? So it's pretty cool. And if you ever have a chance to reach out to him, that would be neat to see what he says, if he would be interested in being the Orville, because I'm definitely on board with it right now, because I think he's a high point of the show right now for Picard. Probably the only real high point, honestly. So
we'll work on it. And let me just say, Mr. Ed Harris, I love your work, and I thought your work in the Abyss was fantastic. So it's nice to meet you.
And I appreciate that. And I have a funny story to tell about that at some point in the future. It'll be funny to me.
So I'm going to mention Ed is actually, he's on the show tonight. He's going to be a contributing writer actually for our upcoming digital magazine. And he's actually on the show tonight to actually talk about basically one of the number one story we're going to hit in our pop culture news segment tonight.
And PJ is going to contribute. He's going to be our first featured content creator. We're going to be doing an interview with him in the e-zine. PJ has agreed to do that. So we're going to be doing an interview with PJ about Orville Nation, about his YouTube channel, and what he's trying to accomplish and all that good stuff. He's going to be our first content creator, featured content creator. So for specifically for streaming and all that stuff. So we're looking forward to that with the e-zine. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're looking to have that out at the end of March, right? End of March is when
that's going to be the goal. Everyone's kind of getting everything kind of together. I've contacted everyone who's going to be working on this first issue. Everyone's pretty much in place. So we're at the point now where people are getting their ideas together, figuring out how they're going to structure their stories, and kind of pulling it together. And then I'll be coordinating, doing a lot of layout. I'll be contributing some stuff, obviously, as well, to the publication too. So we should probably wrap up the review for Picard, and then we can get into all this other stuff.
Well, we have another comment from Katie. She said, Hugh was the best part of that episode. 100% agree with you, Katie. 100% agree. He is a genuine character, not forced like the others. I agree with you. These legacy characters, quote unquote, were probably brought on to bring in fans because the new characters wouldn't. That's exactly how I feel, Katie. I mean, that's exactly how I feel. And one of the concerns I have is that we do know that Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis are going to be in the next episode. That's apparently where Picard has gone, is to whatever colony that they're on. Which I thought is kind of weird too. Why aren't they on Earth? But whatever, maybe we'll find out. But my real concern is this is going to be a kind of a throwaway cameo, that they are not going to be really relevant to the story in any way or anything like that. I do know from Jerry Ryan's interview on the Ready Room that she is coming back. She said she is going to come back this season. So she didn't die. There was some fan speculation that she died because, you know, she was in that situation with the guards are kind of closing in on her and she was just literally in the middle of a room shooting with no cover or anything like that, which some people made a little fun of. But apparently she is coming back. She mentioned that in the Ready Room. Also in the Ready Room, Rod Roddenberry was in the Ready Room with Will Wheaton. Did any of you guys see this? Any of you guys watch the Ready Room?
I missed that one. No.
It was fascinating because I've wondered what Rod's involvement is as an executive producer of this show. And I'll be honest, the interview was a little difficult for me to watch because Will Wheaton was talking all about the legacy of Star Trek, the legacy of Gene Roddenberry, and what makes Trek Trek. And quite frankly, what he said was the same thing that I think most of us say, which is that it's about that optimistic view of the future. And that's really the core principle of Star Trek. And I kept feeling like, are one of you going to address the fact that Star Trek Picard is not that? You know what I mean? That it's not doing that. And how does that conversation go? And there was a little moment where Rod talked about sort of his involvement and the fact that basically they give him notes, they send him ideas, and then he makes comments about them. And his job essentially is to sort of look at that legacy. That's the way he kind of explained it, to look at that legacy and give comments like, well, that's not very Trek, that kind of a thing. And he kind of alluded to the fact that he did have some issues with, and it was very subtle, but he kind of alluded to the fact that he does have some issues with the way the characters interact with each other, and that they're not very Trek. And you can just kind of barely feel it, in what he's saying. And it's very telling. It kind of reminded me of the first interview with Shaban, where Shaban kind of just dropped out there that, you know what, they threw my draft away. My original pitch was thrown in the trash, even though that was the pitch that got Patrick Stewart on the show. So I do encourage you guys to watch the Ready Room with Will Wheaton, because sometimes they say things and you can kind of sense the double meaning of what they're saying. And it feels like they're letting something slip that maybe they really aren't supposed to, and it is interesting to watch. And Jerry Ryan was also on that episode as well. And
there's definitely reading between the lines when you're watching them sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. There's body language. You can tell when somebody's feeling like a little uncomfortable with the question, all sorts of stuff like that. But I have to say, I actually kind of felt bad for Rod, because I felt like Will Wheaton was not kind of, recognizing the elephant in the room, that Picard really isn't those things. You know what I mean? And they were talking about all the kinds of things that all we fans talk about. And it was just like, that's not really in Picard though, And
can I add, when you're finished, can I add something, Eric? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. We do have a couple more comments in the chat here. Clyde mentioned, says, I think your Facebook location will be a big win for your blog. Who exactly is that directed to? Is our Facebook location, or?
I think that might be directed towards me, just talking about that the Facebook page will be a big win overall for what we're doing. So, and I'd have to say I agree. The Facebook page for the show is where we get our most interaction. I think we get our most views. Over time, the views actually accumulate. And for example, like the big growth area, I think right now for us is actually ironically enough, the audio show again.
Right.
Since we switched over to the
Anchor.
Anchor. Thank you. Since we switched over to which I should remember that they're a sponsor. Since we switched over to Anchor, we've had a lot more. I've noticed the show growing by leaps and bounds. The stats are way up from where they were before. We have lots of new people finding us. These are all good things. So yes, definitely right now the Facebook is the hub for what we're doing here with the Retro Rogues, but I don't think that's going to be the hub, moving forward. I think obviously, the website, the e-zine, the podcast, all these other things are going to continue to grow. And also, number two, the most important thing that's a big win for the show is all these wonderful people in here right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
That PJ's on here, the fact that Ed is on here, the wonderful commenters and the people who support and watch the show, like Katie and Bobby. That's the real win. The community that's slowly being built, that's the big win. That's what's important.
Absolutely. And Katie did say that Rod Rottenberry gave her hope. She said, Rod Rottenberry gave me hope. I just hope that I hope he's just not ignored all the time. That's the concern that I have is how much do they weigh his comments and things like that when he says, the way these characters are interacting is not very Trek. You know what I mean? I don't know how much they take what he says into consideration. She also said, taking a moment to comment how happy I was that I finally the word Janeway was mentioned when Jerry was interviewed. Again, leave it to the actors to know the history of their character, not the writers. And yeah, that's in reference to the Ready Room interview that Jerry Ryan did. She did specifically mention Janeway and the relationship that Seven and Janeway had. And she was talking about that in terms of trying to bring the character back and all that kind of stuff. And you would wish that would be like a line of dialogue somewhere in this. You know what I mean? Like some mention of Janeway. But honestly, it feels to me like Seven did not learn any of the lessons that Janeway taught her. She's kind of gone on a very dark path, and she's not really encouraging the angels of her nature right now. She's in a very dark place. She's basically on a blood feud, a vendetta, that kind of thing, and that's not exactly very Trek. It's certainly not the kind of things that Janeway was trying to impart to Seven. So I don't think I never took it that way.
Right. And I was just going to mention, if I could, to talk to Katie directly. The last episode, I talked about how shocked I was that when Icheb was going through what he was going through in the episode, I was shocked that the fact that the Starfleet didn't have a rescue operation looking for him, essentially. And when the rescue operation showed up, that it was just Seven by herself. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Janeway in that moment, with some other Federation security officers. Seven can still be part of the Fenris Rangers, but if she needed help or if Janeway knew that this was going on, in that moment, I felt like the two of them should have been there together, looking for Icheb. I just feel like that for Trek history and for those of us who've watched all the shows and who love all the shows and love all these characters, I felt like it was a huge misstep not to have Janeway there with Seven. And then you don't have to show us that maybe Janeway isn't on the same page as Seven, thinking that the Fenris Rangers bases vigilantes is something that she can't support. That can always be a line of dialogue later on that explains why they're still not, they're not tight, currently. I don't know. I thought that was a huge misstep in that episode. But then again, I had problems with that whole opening sequence anyway. I didn't like having to see that, and I felt like that Starfleet would be looking for him. I just couldn't imagine he'd just be out there by himself going through that.
Well, the really sad part too is, in a way, it kind of reflects badly on Janeway, Chakotay, the entire Voyager crew. Really, it's like, well, where the hell were they when all this was going on? You know what I mean? Why aren't they helping out? I mean, Icheb was a member of the crew. He was the one that actually joined Starfleet. He was a Starfleet cadet while the show was still going. They were basically doing, an online course for him, and he actually joined Starfleet. They kill him in a Starfleet uniform, which, by the way, doesn't really make any sense because he was on leave. That's the kind of stuff where it's like, you're violating your own continuity right now. You said he was on leave. Why the hell is he in a Starfleet uniform when he's on leave helping the Fenris Rangers? That kind of stuff is just like, how did that get past everybody? But it's like, you can tell what they're doing is it's little TV tricks, because they're like, well, we want to establish that it's Icheb. We want to establish that he was a Starfleet officer. So let's put him in the uniform, even though he's on leave. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
You know, nobody's going to notice that. I did. You know what I mean? And it takes me out of the world again, where I'm like, come on, that's a silly like TV thing. You guys aren't even following your own rules right now. So that I think we all agree that the whole Icheb thing is terrible. What they did to Icheb is awful. You know,
if you look at the comments, I think Ronnie's comment kind of sums it up.
Despair and disappointment means Picard is being discussed. Oh, Ronnie. Yep, I think you've unfortunately hit the nail right on the head.
You guys know? Have you heard as well that Manu, the actor who plays Icheb, has also been blacklisted from the conventions now?
Really?
Yeah, I saw that on your interview.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and there's a whole story there, and I do recommend people check out Orville Nation's interview with Manu, because they get into a lot of depth. He discusses some of the, I don't know if you would call it the feud or whatever that he was going on. A lot of it came down to a tweet that he did, and a lot of people just will not forgive him for this tweet, even though the person the tweet was directed at, which was Anthony Rapp, has forgiven him, which is really shows you how fandom gets completely insane. But yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, and I will say, justice for Icheb, you know what I mean? Because for me, that wasn't Icheb, because hey, Manu wasn't playing him, so that really wasn't Icheb as far as I'm concerned. I'll make that argument, Katie mentions, I will say, if this show makes it that Janeway and Seven had a falling out, I will be done. The Janeway-Seven relationship was the one thing I loved in Voyager. If it is destroyed, I will be broken. And I totally understand this, Katie, because this is her favorite Star Trek. I know that from Katie's posts and stuff like that. Star Trek Voyager is her favorite. So I can totally understand that and relate to that. It's I don't know. In some ways, I think it's good they're not mentioning Janeway, because I feel like if they did mention Janeway, it's only going to be bad. It's going to be like, oh, well, she just left her. You know what I mean? And you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's not going to be necessarily a good thing if they did bring Janeway back, even in dialogue. It's going to like somehow reflect badly on her and her legacy. It says, I'm already heartbroken over the C7 issue. Eric, you probably know I'm a C7er. It breaks my heart to see the darkness of Seven. She didn't deserve it. She would have thrived on Earth. And I think a lot of fans feel like Seven, like I said earlier, Seven's in a really dark place. And I don't think that's what fans were hoping for her. They were hoping that Seven was going to be in a really good place by now. And I think a lot of fans are really upset at the fact that she's obviously in a very bad, broken kind of place right now. She also goes on, the writers should have made it that Seven's knowledge was used by Starfleet to fight the Borg. They would have treated her like she was gold, her knowledge and intelligence. Ambassador to the Borg. That's an interesting idea. I think that's an interesting idea if they had gone down that route.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I guess that's my biggest surprise is and a bit of a shock is just how all alone Seven is. Because even though we mentioned it before, I know, Eric, you keep calling out the Lone Ranger idea, but it's just kind of to me it seems sad and unfortunate that even though they're called the Fenris Rangers, so far it's just a Fenris Ranger of one. She's in a solitary ship by herself. She's trying to save Icheb by herself. When she's trying to help out Picard's motley crew on board that ship, which I don't think has a name, she's basically by herself. and I just feel like that's unfortunate.
The ship
Rangers
is called
Empire is more
La
than one. Go ahead, PJ. Sorry.
I was just going to say that the ship is called La Sirena.
Oh,
La
okay.
Sirena, the mermaid in Spanish.
Oh, okay, cool.
If I could just add one thing to what Eric was saying before, I just want to. It's interesting that all the actors, or a lot of the Star Trek actors, are walking this very fine line because they're all eager to work. They would love to be on the show, but they don't. At the same time, they don't want to critique. They don't want to critique anything that they see wrong because they want to be on the show. They want to be back in the Star Trek universe.
No,
Oh yeah, well, I don't ever fault the actors for wanting to work, and there are segments of the fandom that they will confuse the character with the actor. You should never do that. Actually, Manu had a good take on that, and he's very open in saying, "I'm not Icheb. I'm not as good as he is." You know what I mean? But he appreciates the fact that Icheb is different than him personally. That's what actors do. They act and they want to work. I understand that, and the fandom has to understand that even when they're disappointed and an actor makes a questionable decision, or they feel like they quote unquote ruin the legacy of the character. We last week we had, or was it last week or the week before, we did the quote from Harrison Ford where somebody went up and asked him, "Hey, were you a Force ghost in the last Star Wars?" His response was, "I don't know what the fuck a Force ghost is." He's not a fan. He's an actor. You know what I mean? He's playing a character. So a lot of actors, that's their attitude, and they shouldn't be faulted for that. It's a job. They're not necessarily fans. That's very common, especially in the sci-fi genre, unfortunately, and in Trek. Most Trek actors are not fans. They're not. Okay, and people have to realize that. So there is a disconnect there. Ronnie kind of mentioned, I think, along these lines, says that's true. He says you don't want your favorite character making a cameo in this. That hopefully this is all a game by Q, but that would require intelligent writing. Ronnie, that's kind of what I was alluding to, is that, yeah, at this point, I feel like you almost don't want your favorite character in this. I did like Data. I did like the way they brought back Data. In fact, that to me is the high point of the series, is the very first scene with Data and Picard. I like that. I like Brent Spiner a lot. I like that he was in it. I like that he came back as Data. But I do think in a lot of ways, some of these legacies of the characters are being trampled on. They're being trampled on. And they're not in the places that we would have wanted them to be, the places that we hope them to be as fans, as people that watch these shows, that still watch these shows. It's a little shocking. It's a little shocking. And I think we're coming up like on the hour mark for this review, but so I'll let Katie have this last word, unless anybody else on the panel wants to chime in. But said, where the heck is Janeway, Chakotay, the Doctor, Paris, B'Elanna? Now, if the Voyager crew is the Fenris or Janeway is the head, I'll be hooked. I doubt it though. Seven shouldn't be alone. I don't think Janeway would be the head of the Fenris Rangers. I don't think it would fit her MO. The last we saw her was a Nemesis, and she was an admiral. Now, would she still be an admiral now? I don't know. I don't know what they would do. Apparently Riker's not, that's going to be disappointing to me. It looks like Riker's not even in Starfleet anymore. I don't know. I mean, it kind of goes back to what Ronnie was saying, and I don't know if you really want your favorite characters in this, because I don't think it's going to be good. Ronnie says it was all downhill from the first scene. I thought it was a beautiful one. I'm glad they didn't mess up the Data cameo at least. And I agree. I thought it was a beautiful scene. As a fan, I really love that scene. I have an emotional attachment to that scene.
I have one question for you guys. Does anybody think Laura is involved in this story?
Well, let me chime in, because Eric has been putting forth that theory, and but he also says that he feels like, and I'm speaking for you, Eric, I apologize, but he also has stated that he feels like that there's a possibility that that's not really going to be anything they do in this show. However, I hope that Laura is a part of the show. I would like for Laura to basically be somehow kind of behind a lot of what we're seeing. And that it's not just Maddox off by himself, but it's Maddox in league with Lore. And maybe that way Eric put forth the idea that maybe they use this similar kind of technology that they use to create Dodge and Soji, and maybe Lore has a more human persona. He's able to age. And then that way Brent Spiner could just come on and basically be Lore again, but they don't have to worry about doing the makeup and the contacts and the whole thing. And it kind of gives him an in and a way to be on the show, and maybe even be, if not the big bad, one of the major players in the background kind of pulling the strings with a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, and as I've said, I think that would be so cool if they did that, but I don't think that's actually going to happen. I just think it would be cool if they did that. I think it would be a really neat twist if Soji and Dodge were the daughters of Lore and not the daughters of Data. It would make a lot more sense, because you assume that Maddox had access to Lore, that Lore was put in a box somewhere like B4. But I'm not really holding out hope of that theory being correct. And Ronnie did ask, because I think he's going off that comment that I made. He says, wait, hold up. Riker is non-admiral? I haven't watched episode 3. Ronnie, I'm going by the scenes that we've seen from the preview, because there was a preview at the end of the episode, and clearly Riker is in civilian attire. Troy is in civilian attire. We know from the end of this episode of The Impossible Box that it appears that Picard is going to some colony, and we can pretty much assume that colony is where Riker and Troy are at. That's why Picard is going there, to seek some sort of sanctuary with them. I will say one thing that I'm a little disappointed about is I was kind of happy to finally see kind of everybody together, because most of Picard is basically 2 tracks. You have the Soji, the Soji track and the Picard track. So you have what Picard is doing, then you have what's going on with Soji and the Romulan. And finally to see them together, I'm like, okay, now the story is really moving. Now we can really go forward with this story, and it can start to get interesting. It kind of disappointed me that they're separating again. So Picard is with Soji, but the crew got left behind. So the crew still has to deal with whatever they're going to deal with, the repercussions. We had the scene with Elnor. Elnor is sitting there with Hugh.
Right.
I was kind of like, why didn't Elnor and Hugh just go through the portal with Soji and Picard? I don't understand that. What's the point? I mean, Hugh has definitely been found out. I mean, the guards are coming, so everybody knows what Hugh did. We can see in the preview that they're interrogating him. So I didn't quite understand that, why Elnor and Hugh didn't just go through the portal with Soji and Picard. That I thought was weird.
I gotta say, it bothers me a little bit. The whole thing about Elnor at the very end, his he's confronting guys with his security team with lasers with his sword. I don't know. I think it's just one of those things that the people in production and writing have not thought through.
Yeah, the sword thing. We talked about the sword thing before, and I am a big non-fan of the sword thing because swords are very conspicuous. Okay, and the second you walk in any place in a sword, if you walk into a bar with a sword in modern times, okay, you attract a lot of attention, and they're going to call the police. Okay, that's exactly what would be happening in the future as well. Whether they have police or not, they're going to call some authority. They're going to be on guard. Anybody with a gun, anybody with a disruptor or a phaser is going to be ready to use that. And it's funny because even in the show, when we first saw Elnor use his weapon and he chopped off the former Romulan senator's head, the next guy was like, oh, well, screw this. I'm just going to shoot you. And he started reaching for his disruptor, and that's when they got beamed up. even in the show, they kind of made fun of it. I say it was like very close to being an Indiana Jones moment. And now it appears like Elnor's making this big stand with multiple Romulan security responding, and Tal Shiar, we assume, and he's gonna come out just smelling roses and he killed everybody, and I don't know. I don't understand it. I think it pushes the that suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, the Indiana Jones moment just comes to mind. I can just see that GIF of Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Cool.
Do we have any other thoughts on this last episode of Picard?
I was just going to say overall that, like I said, from the introduction of Hugh on, I like the episode. I'm hoping that we don't have to watch Hugh get tortured in the next episode. And that we continue on this forward trajectory, because I did enjoy the second half of the episode quite a bit. From the introduction of Hugh on, I was having a lot of fun and really enjoying what they were showing us, and it was really refreshing because the way Hugh was being with Picard and touring him through the Borg cube, and we were learning more about it. It was very interesting. It felt very Trek. And so overall, I'd say, like I said, this is one of the better episodes, and I'm hoping that the next episode will hopefully continue that trend. That's my last bit I've got to say about this episode 6. Was it the Impossible Box?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement that Hugh is the highlight, and Hugh kind of makes the episode. I think he makes the episode. So,
yeah. Is that good? Are we ready to move on, or?
Yeah, I think
Go
so.
ahead.
We can move on to pop culture. And by the way, PJ, I know you kind of came on impromptu, so if you have to duck out, we understand, or anything like that. But we were going to do some pop culture news.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to say I have to jump off, but I want to say thanks again, Dave. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice
I hope
meeting you
you guys can come on the Orville Nation for an interview, and so I will be in touch. Ed, it was very nice to meet you. My pleasure.
You too, PJ.
So I'll let you guys continue. Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for the invite,
Cool.
guys. Good night.
Oh,
Well,
thanks for being
the
on.
show.
We've talked about it quite a bit, and it's nice that you actually made it on, because I've been on PJ's channel, but he hasn't had a chance to come on ours yet. So that's awesome. And then don't forget, he's going to be our first featured content creator in our e-zine. So we definitely want to push that.
Oh, it's an honor.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'll let you guys continue. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks,
Cool.
PJ.
Thank you.
I cannot say enough good things about Orville Nation, and I really feel like PJ is a leader, sort of like in the YouTube streaming community, because he has all sorts of people as guests. I mean, people that don't even really have a whole lot of content. He's had them come on the show, and they can give their opinions and theories. I got a real wild theory from one of his subscribers about Picard early on that I thought was just really interesting. And I was kind of like, well, that's a good theory, but I don't think the writers are good enough to come up with your idea, So, but it's fun. It's a real community. Orville Nation has like a real community. They love anything sci-fi. Most Orville fans, I would say, are also Star Trek fans. Not all. I have actually interacted with some Orville fans that never watch Star Trek, which I think is interesting. But there's a lot of cross-pollination there.
Very cool. So if we're good to move on to pop culture, if you would